Litigation Psychology Podcast, brought to you by Courtroom Sciences. I'm Dr. Bill Kanaski, here with my guest, Tim Yeary. Tim, how are you doing over in Dallas, Texas?
I'm doing very, very well. Good morning to you.
So happy to have you on the show. And as you know, you and I have talked a lot this week, and you're in the trucking industry, and we really want to dedicate the month of May to getting the word out to the trucking industry on updates, strategies, try to get the industry talking more. It's a very unique time for the trucking industry. Can you tell us a little bit about your company, your background, and kind of your role in the trucking industry? Because you're not a trial attorney. We're talking to a lot of trial attorneys on their perspectives, but we really want somebody from more the insurance side of things and coverage. Tell us a little about your background.
Right. So I guess originally to start out, son of a truck driver. My dad's been a single unit owner operator my entire life till his recent passing in February, but just grew up in a trucking family. And so I've been here at Kleinwood since 2013. We are an insurance agency and risk management that just specializes in the trucking industry is what we do. Prior to coming to work for Kleinwood, I actually was at a 600-unit pneumatic tank carrier in operations role there, and we had actually grown that company from probably 30, 35 trucks up to 600 plus. Oh, wow. So just a lot of experience there on the operational side, and now being able to blend that on the insurance side gives me kind of a unique perspective. I think when I'm meeting with my clients, my insureds, is I've actually sat on their side of the table before. It makes that conversation a lot more fluid, I believe.
Excellent. So COVID-19, we're hopefully on the back end of it, not the middle of it. But it's obviously had a huge impact on the trucking industry. And I know and I'm aware that some of the kind of the rules and the guidelines have been drastically shifted for the trucking industry to allow them to make more deliveries, to deliver goods and things like that. How long do you think that's going to last? And at some point, do they reel it in, or where do you see that going?
Yeah, so it's kind of really been unique how and what they labeled as essential products that were needed to get out. I would say the vast majority of freight has still remained under the same regulations that it's had before. It's just that from a federal and state perspective concerning hours of service and certain things, they did loosen the regulations in that just for essential goods, which affected a small percentage of the transportation industry, but a lot of it still had to remain under the same regulations they had before. I think one of the challenging things that we see from our perspective and that we've counseled our clients on is although there may be a federal guideline that comes down allowing a little bit of gray area in the hours of service during this essential delivery time, what we've counseled our clients is to remain and keep their drivers under the current regs, because the last thing we want as one of our drivers is to be out of hours or have their hours kind of in a gray area in the event of a large accident. Because that's going to be very, very difficult to defend yourself if you have to, go to court with that. So we've really tried to proceed with caution with that and not to use that as any kind of blanket approach to some big operational change.
Very interesting. So the nuclear verdict topic, does this topic just not scare you to death? I mean, are you like up at night losing sleep because some of these nuclear verdicts, particularly in the trucking industry, I mean, it's put some companies out of business. How have you, at your company, have you guys been communicating, talking about these nuclear verdicts and the types of things that you can do to avoid them, because they're bad? Right.
That is a daily conversation we have with every insured that we have. And I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon. Most of my work is primarily focused in Texas, although our firm is national and we do stuff all over, and I travel a lot. It's every town, every city you go in on the interstates. I mean, there's billboard attorneys everywhere that call us, and we'll sue the trucking company for you.
Yep.
And, I think that's the big challenge that we continue to see. And I look at it like, we had the asbestos run back in the 80s. And now that kind of dried up, we've really put a target on the trucking industry. And the sad thing is, though, that we look at it, and I say this coming from a trucking family, that much of the trucking industry, we don't do what we should to guard ourselves to start with. And we're almost giving the other side ammunition a lot of times because we're not following our own policies and our own procedures. And we vary a little bit on that. And they will use those things against us.
Oh, yeah. On several of the cases I work on, trucking industry, it's hard not to cringe when you're going through whether it be the employee handbook or policy and procedures. And the language used in that type of documentation can really set you up for disaster, particularly if it says, ensuring safety is our top priority above and beyond everybody. If that's plastered all over your internal materials, can certainly lead to trouble. Tim, I'm going to share my screen with you, and I want to play you something. It's short.
Okay.
And this is something from our nuclear verdict webinar that we do. It's a short video. And so what I did, can you see that?
Yes.
What I did is I went on YouTube and I just put in the search box, nuclear verdict. This is the only thing that came up. And I want to talk about this because I do think that the use of technology in the trucking industry, obviously it's evolved over time and it's getting very, very sophisticated. But I want you to listen to this message and then let's talk about it.
Okay, perfect.
Today we want to talk about a pretty disturbing trend that we're seeing throughout the industry, which is the rise in nuclear verdicts.
Yet another carrier has closed its doors.
Doing something about the nuclear verdicts against fleets in the industry. Thousands, 5,000 to 10,000 jobs have been eliminated from these carrier pools as well. It keeps happening. This is the 8th major bankruptcy this year. We've seen about 3,000 trucks leave the market.
They've got these programs in place, they've got technology in place, and they walk the walk and talk the talk. You have to have the people in place that are going to monitor it. In this day of technology, where you have all this information that's preserved on a computer system somewhere, then it aids in preventing those spoliation claims. It's great to have technology in place. It can be very beneficial from a legal standpoint to be able to stand up in front of a jury and say, this company exceeds the industry standard when it comes to safety.
All right, so I want to share that with you and go back to our full screen here. A couple things about that kind of bother me. Well, first of all, they have the 3 bullet points on how to avoid a nuclear verdict, and none of them have to do with litigation. None of them have to do with preparing your witnesses to testify. None of them have to do with legal strategy. And then the second thing that bothers me about that video is it's kind of sending the message of, as a trucking company or industry, the more technology you have, you can advertise to a jury that you're the safest around. What are your thoughts on those messages?
So the big word that stuck out to me in that is monitor. Yeah. There's one word that they said. So we can have all the technology under the sun, everything known to man. But if we are not monitoring that and using that for a coaching tool and to actually improve our scores, improve our policies and procedures, and to have corrective criticism within our own organization, because I find that a lot is, companies may have technology, but they're not using that as a tool. And I think that is absolutely crucial. And there's a lot of things that we promote and we really want to encourage our carriers to do. But with that, I'll always tell them, if you don't have the personnel hired to monitor and to use this as a coaching tool, then I would rather you not get the technology. You need to have the personnel ready to utilize it. If not, don't spend the money on it, because it's just fluff at that point.
On several of the cases that I'm working on currently in the trucking industry, it seems like technology cuts both ways, particularly with the use of the in-cab videotape and
dash cameras.
The dash cam and GPS. And so when there is an accident, 9 out of 10 times now you have a full video
right.
of it. What has been the industry talk about technology I guess in some ways it's a real positive, but in other ways can be a real headache when it comes to litigation, right?
So I think there's several ways to look at that, and this is I think a constant argument that we could have on both sides of the fence. Historically, when you look at commercial trucking accidents, 70 plus or minus % of those are statistically caused by passenger cars. So the idea would be that the dash camera is going to help us on at least 70% of those, showing that we're not at fault. And then we've got, another 30% to deal with, and that where we are at fault. And what I have seen is looking at those. If we are at fault, well, let's own up to that. We have the data, we have the footage. We're at fault. Let's settle the claim and let's move forward. And let's just deal with this like we need to, instead of dragging this out for 3 or 4 or 5 years in court. Just making the claim and the cost just continue to accrue. So I think that's one of the things that I look at most is even those who were at fault, I think they could actually settle cheaper just because we just need to own up to it. We messed up. It's on us. Let us do that. But the other 70% so outweigh that just because we're able to. And we've seen that with a lot of our clients, Bill, honestly, is because a lot of those, we have the ability to download and share with a roadside trooper on the side of the road at the accident where, we have a four-wheeler that pulls over in front of us and brake checks our truck and we rear end them. And our driver said, this is not my fault. Here's what happened. We can show the trooper the video footage.
That's amazing.
We'll not get any violation, any citation, no roadside, nothing. Because the trooper is going to look at that other guy and say, man, what were you doing? Wow. So it becomes a very valuable tool when you have that real-time data to work with.
That is absolutely amazing. I did not know that. Pretty amazing stuff. A couple more points before we wrap up. Something I find very, very interesting is how the role of meteorology has played in the trucking industry. Mm-hmm. And I know that some trucking companies have meteorologists on staff.
Right.
And they're the ones making the calls because so many of these accidents are weather related. How do you see that issue as far as decision making, as far as, okay, does this guy get on the road when it's 32 degrees, there may be a 20%, 25% chance of snow? How do you see companies making those calls? And is it a pretty united front across the industry, or is every company doing things a little bit differently in that regard?
I would say every company's different in that regard. Obviously, I think your larger fleets have the ability to staff someone like that, to have the resources to do that, and they're able to track that nationally and really track their drivers. Then I think you see a lot of, because a lot of the trucking industry is made up of fleets that are 10 to 50 trucks. Yeah. A lot of smaller fleets that make up the vast majority of it. And so when you look at those, I think one of the key features in that is what I've seen that's been the most fruitful, if you will, is the number of drivers to a dedicated dispatcher and what that ratio is. Because the idea is that dispatcher, if he's dispatching 10 trucks or he's dispatching 100 trucks, how much more time is he going to be able to spend with a lower number? And so I think that's where a lot of fleets kind of work through that as an internal model of, and that varies too. Are they long haul? Are they moving from California to the East Coast and they're going to have that same load on for 4 days? Or are they regional and they're going to have 3 loads today? So that driver ratio per dispatcher, I think really plays into that a lot. And it goes back to with the weather, is it a regional or a nationwide company? Because there's a lot of factors that can go into that. So, I think just from a fleet standpoint, it varies very, very widely and greatly of how they handle that internally.
Makes sense. Let's wrap up with my favorite topic, reptile. The reptile tactics and the plaintiffs bar practicing those tactics, I think has had the trucking industry in their crosshairs for some time. And unfortunately, have been really successful. And I think a lot of the nuclear verdicts that you're seeing, many of them are driven through these reptile tactics. Is that a discussion you're also having internally about how to identify when you have a case where the reptile tactics are going to be used, and maybe taking some extra steps to try to help get ahead of it? Because what I've seen in the trucking industry is by the time everybody figures out they're getting reptiled, it's way too late. And then the ability to settle a case at a reasonable amount goes out the window. And then when you try to settle, they're like, oh, no, we are going to the courtroom. And that's where they're going to double there. What are some of the discussions on reptile that you guys have been having internally?
So that's kind of been a passion of mine, and it's funny that's yours as well for several years now, just diving into this subject, because I was very fortunate several years ago to actually get to go to a plaintiff conference, kind of under disguise for a couple of days, and it was just very interesting to see some of the strategies and how they would maneuver stuff and how they would teach each other to do this. And I remember just sitting in that room, just shaking my head at this. But they're very intentional in what they do. And I think the plaintiff side has been very strategic in building kind of a cooperative group amongst plaintiff attorneys to roundtable a lot of these claims, where I don't see that on the defense side as much. So I think the plaintiffs definitely are several years ahead of us in this game. And if you want to call it that. And I think they've really, really refined their goal and how they're going to walk you through this path. Like you said, you don't even realize you're walking down this path until it's too late. But I believe they start that process early on in discovery. They walk it all the way through. I'm actually early next week with one of my clients where we're walking through some deposition training, because they actually have one of these coming up here real soon. And it's going to be a lot of those questions like, what are we doing here to prepare for this? How are we going to have these discussions, and what do I need to look for? But I think that's it's very important. I think that motor carriers need to understand what's going on. One of the biggest things that I took away from that plaintiff attorney conference that I went to, speaker after speaker led with this one sentence: if you dig deep enough, it's the trucker's fault.
Wow.
And they would say that over and over and over, and it kind of become the anthem that they led the conference with. So I really do, and it goes back to what I said earlier about an individual's companies, their policies and procedures. I think it is so crucial that we review those, and we find those often to where a motor carrier's had the same policies and procedures for 3, 4, 5 years. Well, a lot of their operations may have changed. Maybe before they were hauling dry vans and now they're hauling reefer freight, or maybe they're pulling a pneumatic tank, or maybe their operations have changed. And we have to really look at, like, all right, does our policies and procedures, does our orientation, does our training material, does all of this, does it mirror exactly what we're doing now in our current operations? And I think that always has to be, walked through and kept current, because that stuff's changing every day. And I think it's vitally important that motor carriers get out and they share with their peers, industry challenges, because I think we can all learn from each other. And for too long, it's almost like the industry, in the trucking industry, we've all operated in these silos, and we want to hold our family secrets close to the chest and not share. Well, we're all going through the same struggles, and we need to, I think, come together as peers to, like, how do we figure out how to get ahead of this as an industry? So,
yeah, and you and I and others have talked about this, how to increase communication, camaraderie, and share ideas and share strategy, because our adversary, like you said, they are very, very good at communicating and sharing ideas. And I think that's really put the industry and just the entire, it's not just trucking, I think it's the entire defense bar is oftentimes behind the 8 ball, because they're 3 steps behind. And until the communication improves, I'm not really sure we can get ahead of the get ahead of the bad guys here. So
yeah, there's one thing that I think is really neat about the time we're in right now. I mean, if we want to find a silver lining, I guess, in the COVID and down in the oil prices, and obviously the country's just kind of in a different state of mind right now. One thing that I think is absolutely important, when I was a little kid, just thinking about driving down the road, and you can picture some little kid giving the truck driver the horn and, and the trucker honk. Well, back then, I mean, it was really a different state of mind, to where the trucking industry and a truck driver, it was a notable career to be a truck driver. It really was. And for now, the industry as a whole, there's a lot of negativity that goes with the trucking industry. And what I think is what's really a neat position we're in right now, and we see it on social media, we see it from President Trump, we see it from all the governors, that truck drivers are right up there with doctors and nurses as our frontline heroes.
Yep.
And I think we need to remember that as a country. And, when as the world and the country opens back up and traffic gets busy, we've got to understand that these truck drivers are delivering the very commodities that each of us want to survive on every day. And I just look at that and think, I don't want our country to look up in 30 or 60 days from now and have short-term memory of where we are today. These guys are crucial to our economy, and we need to remember that.
I think that's going to require an industry public relations effort that's really sustained beyond COVID-19 to get that message out, to have more of that feel-good message out there, because otherwise, you know how these juries are and how people are.
Right.
What have you done for me lately?
Lately.
Very, very short-term memory. Well, Tim, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Be safe out there in Dallas, and we'll make sure to have you back on as things progress.
Okay, sounds great. Have a good day.
Take care, bud.